speaker of this summit. Before I kind of dive into what I was going to talk about, Alex had reached out to me a few months ago and had asked if I'd be willing or wanting to speak at the summit. And I said, well, why would you want me to speak at the summit? And he had said last year, when we were in one of our breakout sessions, one of the questions I had asked was regarding to what we're doing as a community ourselves to make sure that we ourselves as a LGBTQ plus community are being inclusive. And so I actually don't even recall the specific question that I had asked that had piqued Alex's interest and curiosity and having a more lengthy discussion in my perspective of that. But I was honored by the request and absolutely agreed to take on this opportunity. And so it's an honor to be able to speak with such incredibly passionate intellect people such as yourselves. I know that this weekend is going to be filled with great information that's going to lead to great change. And these thought-provoking discussions will give us a variety of tools that we're going to be able to take out and go into our communities and really create the change that we seek if we really work hard and apply it. As we all have our own experiences, we come with different viewpoints, even in the LGBTQ community. These viewpoints this weekend should not divide us, but should create a more inclusive queer community. Before we dive into the pool of knowledge, I want to challenge the perspective we all are bringing into the conversations this weekend. We can no longer pretend to be blind to the chaos that's happening in our politics on a national, local, and municipal level, or even be blind to the state of our nation and local communities due to this chaos. There is an emphasis on fear right now, leaving empathy and forgiveness something to be desired. These divisive tactics are creating barriers to conversations that are necessary for our country and our community to be having, to be able to continue moving forward in the direction that we're all seeking. Although we may all share some commonalities, identifying as LGBTQIA+, we still have a long way to go to be inclusive as a community ourselves. We may have a multitude of voices representing our acronyms, making each of us unique, but also to be mindful that we're not unicorns in our voices and the acronym that we are representing. To help you better understand a little bit about this statement, because it can come off maybe a little harsh, I want to share a little bit about myself. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, a mother of 2 children, a wife, an owner of 3 very, very rambunctious dogs, and a cisgender woman. My ancestors are Jewish German from Russia, and my upbringing is one mixed with variations of privilege and obstruction, which during my upbringing, I was very unclear and unaware of either, that were making different impacts in my life. What I did know growing up was that I was 14 years old, I was a lesbian. I remember watching Boys Don't Cry, and Hilary Swank was the love of my life, and I became obsessed with finding every movie I could watch with her in it because I was gonna marry this woman one day. I absolutely knew at that age that I liked women, and I also knew that that was something that I wasn't supposed to like. It took me 19 years to come out. This was influenced by the fear of my family's rejection. It was influenced by my military leaders and them questioning me and my friendships and relationships that I had with other female soldiers, and threatening to pull any sort of promotions or ranks that I would be able to get. It also was instilled by the military policies at the time as don't ask, don't tell. And then also how my community would respond to me if I did come out. Moving back to North Dakota after serving my time abroad, it was something that was the most shocking transition in my life was moving back to North Dakota and understanding that the communities around here hadn't changed a whole lot since my upbringing and the perspective that it had on the LGBTQ community. What made me come out, or what really encouraged me to make that stuff to come out, was running for office, which isn't a common story per se, but in 2019, I ran for District 47 Senate in Bismarck, North Dakota. At the time, I was still in the closet. I stressed almost every single day with the possibility by being outed by one of my former flings. And although this created high levels of anxiety, it was when I started hearing stories from fellow community members, not just queer community members, but anyone that opened their door and were willing to share their experience, their life, their stories, their personal, raw, real, honest, genuine stories with me. When they didn't even know me, they just knew me as someone standing at their door as a candidate wanting to represent them. I promised myself that if I wanted to be a leader with integrity, I was going to start with myself. And I came out 3 months after elections. I'm not sharing my story because overall it's really new or unique to the LGBTQ community. There's many of us that have been in the closet and still are. There's many people that have some powerful reason why they came out or why they made the decision to go back in. I share this because it's taken many years and 2 political campaigns to start really reflecting on the barriers we face as a community and what barriers we face as individuals. A coming out story may be common among our community, but how are we being inclusive with those individuals as well as being inclusive with those who are not, meaning our allies? Now, I know that inclusion may sometimes feel like it's natural because of the community that we represent, but being a lesbian does not make me immune to prejudice thinking, especially if part of my belief system was ingrained in me through my upbringing, my traditions, my morals, societal training, or simply just not knowing what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. In North Dakota, it is not uncommon to have the attitude to just blend in or to just keep quiet and no one will bother you. Last year when we were at the summit, it really struck me when there was a couple who were speaking and they were talking about their experience about living on the west side of our state. And those were almost verbatim things that they had said was, you just mind your business and you don't do anything too inappropriate in public and people are going to leave you alone. And I remember Josh Boucher was one of the panelist speakers, and he said, well, that makes it really hard for those who are transgender when they're just trying to be them true selves and they're not doing anything, but it's still bothering others. And I found that to be really an indicator on how different our viewpoints are, not just from generation to generation, but also where, again, we ourselves as a community need to continue working on our own values and views on inclusion. We all have levels of privilege, but some of us, such as myself, are born into privilege that can make us blind or even unaware of challenges that our fellow LGBTQ community members experience. Many times when the discussion of inclusion and diversity comes up, it's met with defensiveness and displacement, especially here in North Dakota, especially during the election year, especially with the leaders that we have currently in office. It's easy to feed into stereotypes than to feel guilty or ashamed for a way that we were thinking or a comment that we made or a joke that we laughed to. Take the responses of our legislative leaders here in North Dakota after the 2020 GOP resolutions were sent out. This made national news. And although some were really quick to separate themselves from such hate-filled language, it was the deafening silence that hurt the most. And what I want to clarify with that statement is not meant to be political. It's not to divide, oh, it was a GOP party versus a Democratic party. It's to point out the response of our leaders, elected officials that are meant to represent all of their constituents here in the communities of North Dakota, to remain silent, for not one of their representatives to step up and say this is something far beyond that should have never passed, or for it to even get to the point where it was able to pass, is what I want, and is really what I'm pointing out with that. Both of which and also that I've displayed both of those. I have in the past remained silent when I've heard comments or I've seen situations where I knew it was inappropriate bias or prejudice. And I've also deflected comments that have been made onto myself. I've spent the last few years learning about my biases. It's really hard. I have felt shameful and guilty. I have felt angry towards others as well as my own actions. And I've also felt really empowered through the process that will forever be my personal development. When we remain silent against those who push to discriminate against any member of our community, we are no better than the oppressors themselves. I also believe that silence creates an opportunity to spread falsehoods about the LGBTQ community, such as claims that we are very open and accepting of pedophiles and pedophilia, and that they're part of what we represent. That's never been the case. It never has been. We all know this, but when we remain silent as a community, we are then opening up that opportunity for those sort of falsehoods to spread. Something like that has gained traction, not only in our state, but also our nation. Now, I know that we all have limitations on our ability to advocate equally for every acronym, right? Like, I'm never going to know the experience of a female to male transgender. I'm going to know the experience as a cisgender woman, as a lesbian, as a mother. And even though I can educate myself and support my community, my fellow community members, and continue helping allies understand some of the struggles, I'm never going to be the direct voice of that experience. So my call to action to all of us is that this weekend, we have a chance to broaden our own viewpoints and perspectives with topics ranging from transitioning in the military, queer family adoption, policies making headway in politics, and many, many more. I encourage each and every one of us to absorb this information with an eager energy and a sense of responsibility to put this information into action. In the words of the notorious RBG, fight for things you care about, but do it in a way that others join you. Thank you. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Brandi. That was like the perfect beginning. Thank you so much. One thing I do want to say, I forgot to mention, which I have to say, all of you did so amazing. Nobody talked. When it's just important that we don't interrupt when people are speaking. Put your microphones on mute. But you all did amazing, and again, thank you, Brandi. So we're going to turn it over now to Barry, who started this all with a thought that him and Aaron had. And I am excited for you guys to hear what Barry has to say and kind of describe like the beginning of this summit, which now we're in our third year.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Brandi, for starting us off on such a profound note on the third annual summit. It is really exciting to be amongst all of you this evening to start off a weekend of, I think, what will be profound learning, profound reflection, and resolution to become that good trouble that Mr. Lewis talked about, that we would be the good trouble that will change things even here in North Dakota. I need to begin, first of all, to really do a shout out to this year's coordinator. Alex, you stepped up. I think I tricked you into being the coordinator initially, but you responded and you became a great leader in this third annual effort. Believe me when I tell you this is a huge undertaking. It started last winter, really not long after the last summit of 2019, and it's been going on nonstop. I want to acknowledge the committee members, Cindy, Linda, Jan, James, and Ming. You've been staying with the project. You've been working hard on bringing this together through thick and thin, through decisions about whether or not we should be again trying to meet in person or to do virtual, and then all the kinds of dimensions about making this a virtual connection, but making it as important as we gather. I also want to say that I really appreciate how much you are being in my world. I thought of it as particularly this past week, particularly as I saw our country and most of my friends and colleagues reeling once again from so many horrible signs in our country. We experienced the debate, or some of us did, I couldn't. We looked at the president's tax returns, the petulance, the divisiveness, the horrible examples of leadership, a pandemic going in the wrong direction here in our own state, and leaders unwilling to do the right thing. This can point to a lot of despair and wondering if there's really anything we can do to change this. But I know by being amongst people like you that that's the antidote to my despair, is my prescription. Instead, I'm around people who believe passionately about making their community a better place, which you all do, who without ego are willing to lead and work and collaborate. This is a fantastic experience. Thank you for sharing yourselves with me personally, with each other. Your vulnerability, your passion, your leadership is all very much recognized and appreciated. So a little history. I think this is what Alex told me to do, a little context. And I'm a historian. I love history. I like knowing what part I've played in the context of history going before me and what was going forward from me. And we've already talked about it in our social hour that the first summit of 2018 did in fact grow out of a conversation in a coffee shop in Bismarck. Shortly after I was defined as a organizer with the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition, I did a little bit of a state tour, and I ended up visiting with Aaron Pringle with Dakota Outright in Bismarck. And this is how I remember it. I'm not sure if Aaron agrees to this conversation, but I don't know if she's here to dispute me, so I get to go with my version of it. But as we're talking about lots of things, one of the things that kept coming up was Aaron would be asking me like, well, what's going on in Fargo? What's the Pride Collective and Community Center doing? Do you know what's going on in Grand Forks with the gay community there? And I think I said this somewhat tongue in cheek, saying, don't you people talk to each other? And she said, no, I don't think we really do. And that really was that exchange just started off us on the idea that we needed to come together, that we are a really large state geographically. We have population centers scattered and separated from miles and miles, and we don't talk to each other. We didn't talk to each other. And so what would be the best way to bring people together to start figuring out what our larger community, a sense of community would be? And out of that grew the sense of the first summit of 2018. And I don't know that we anticipated the kind of response that we did in fact receive from that first gathering. We defined, there was a small group of collective people organizing it. We defined that we had 3 purposes. The number one purpose was to provide a sense of networking, of bringing people together to know that the kinds of work they were doing in their own individual community was a part of a much, much larger movement, and that we could grow from knowing what that larger community looked like. The second one we wanted to do was education. There was so much we needed to learn about ourselves, about our communities, about the national scene, and what kinds of things we needed to be doing in order to affect change. And then the third one, which is the one that I kept harping on, is political organizing. That the only way we could really change things is really to bring our voices together and try to provide a collective sense of organizing with the legislature and within our own communities. It's the quote of Margaret Mead says that the only way that only a group of small, passionate citizens coming together is the only way that social change happens. And I think we're kind of proving that going forward. So out of this conversation, we grew with the first the summit. We decided on a central location, which happened to be this hotel in Mandan, North Dakota. And the excitement and the enthusiasm that came from people gathered at that first meeting was really satisfying. The number of people that said, I didn't know about this organization. I didn't know this was happening in other communities. I didn't know there were other people that were working and feeling and believing the same way that I did. It was a really electrifying kind of experience to have people in the same room talking to each other and coalescing around common themes and common missions and common visions about how they would like their state and the community to be. At the same time, there was a lot of sharing of pain, personal pain of isolation, of growing up in a state that didn't recognize or appreciate the diversity of people living here. And yet people, as we talked about in the social hour, still saying, but I want this to be a place where I can continue to live, and not just live, but to thrive and to be accepted within this community. So it just very much came. I mean, one of the conclusions from that first meeting was, can we do this again, or how often can we do it? Let's continue doing this. The challenge was, how do we become intersectional with all the diversity within the community? How do we make sure that the voices of our Indigenous community is heard, the Two-Spirit community? I love the beginning with Cardinal Redbird expressing the expression of that we are all on stolen land, on land of our Indigenous people that were here first. And we need to acknowledge this all the time, and to know that they continue to be amongst us and thrive, and with the Two-Spirit really inform how we as a community need to be going forward. We began recognizing how important it was to have all age demographics in the room, and recognizing that the average age of our first year's participant was a little bit higher than we had hoped it would be. So to be very deliberate about that. So I think that we immediately began working for the second year summit. We had new people coming to the planning committee. We had a resolution that we would be very intentional in inviting and young people into the summit, and with great response. We had a wonderful response from GSAs, particularly in the western part of the state, who really brought this energy and excitement into the summit that I continue to reflect back on to this day, because it was an incredible experience. So what am I thinking as we're going forward into year 3? First of all, thank goodness for somebody like Alex, who could transition this from a in-person gathering to a virtual gathering. This was completely outside of my wheelhouse, and so thank you for stepping up. Thank you, Cindy, all the other people for stepping up and making this a reality. I'm concluding that bit by bit we are getting better. We're expanding the places from where people are attending. We're very cognizant the first summit that we had many communities that weren't represented at the summit, but that greatly expanded the second year, where we had people from dozens of communities joining us. We are continuously challenged to do better in making sure we are mindful of the intersectionality in terms of making sure that we, in a meaningful way, include Indigenous people, the Two-Spirit, our BIPOC community, our transgender community, making sure that those voices are at the table and visiting with us. I was particularly excited about last year that we had a representative of the Muslim community join us when we talked about spirituality and LGBTQ and recognizing of the diversity that exists within us. We've forged incredible partnerships locally and nationally. I'm particularly appreciative of Equality Federation, which North Dakota Human Rights Coalition is affiliated. The National Center for Lesbian Rights, my gosh, we had Julia Gonen at that first year, and the kind of vitality and energy that she brought to their planning with the rural initiative that was happening within that organization was incredible. And Ming, thank you for stepping in after her departure and continuing that going forward. We brought the Trevor Project last year. We had an incredible several days with them meeting with our Department of Education, with the Teachers Association, and just had some really fantastic conversations as well as what they brought to the conference. We have a great relationship we forged with the Human Rights Campaign and AARP. We had a national representative the first year talking about aging gay population and how we can integrate that into the programming. And then, of course, our local affiliates. We continue to identify local organizations that are doing great work in their communities. Red River Rainbow Seniors, the Pride Collective, Dakota Outright, Magic City Equality, which has stepped up. I'll talk about a little bit of exciting things that have happened there. And also support from the private business. The one thing that really impressed people at the national level when they said, how do you raise money for this? And I said, that has never been an issue. There's always been resources that have come forward to support the organizing that we are doing. And I think that's something we should celebrate in our community. You know, the things that I reflected on since October of 2019, what's happened. Who would have sat in that room in Mandan, in that hotel, and been able to even begin to speculate what the year ahead of us would happen? Who would begin to think about the impact of a pandemic on our communities and in our country? It's without fathom that we can think about that. Who could think about, on the positive side, the Supreme Court ruling with the Bostock ruling that really truly created equity in the allowing the sexual orientation, gender identity be under the Title VII Civil Rights Act. Incredible. And then how our own state has chosen to interpret that to mean that now people can file grievances around employment, public accommodation, and housing in North Dakota. This did not need action from the legislature. It was done arbitrarily by our Human Rights Commissioner, Erica Thunder. Who would think about the fact that we would have on top of the pandemic, the very public murder of George Floyd in police custody that would have rippling effects on how we look at race and equity in our country. It's still reverberating throughout the country and in our own communities, where we had responses in larger communities and small communities as well, where we had Black Lives Matter voices being raised, and we have organization around racial issues in our communities coming at us on a daily basis. But thank God for those voices raising the issues that are happening right here in small town North Dakota that we need to be acknowledging and be bringing into our conversation. Who could believe the sadness that we reflect upon with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg? I have to believe that the weight of reflecting upon one's legacy and looking at one's life energies abating at the end of one's career is in itself daunting. But then to know the weight upon Ruth's shoulders as she also recognized her eventual leaving this earth and leaving her position on the Supreme Court would have in the country in which she loved, in which she had done so much incredible work. And it's a legacy that we are lifting upon our shoulders now as we rest on her shoulders going forward in the kinds of dimensions that are going to come from that. We look at the incredible energy that's occurring within one of our own communities here in Minot. And Magic City Equality, I applaud you and the kinds of incredible work that you're doing in that community, and the incredible work that's being done with the first openly lesbian city council member in office who has become an international rock star, as her response to very, very rich, vitriolic and hateful response to a celebration of life and diversity in communities reached the world stage. But this is an incredible leadership and an opportunity for people's voices to really become important here in our communities and in our country. So it's the kind of things that we have an opportunity to build on as we mourn the kinds of things that are happening as well. We have incredible opportunities and challenges before us. We have very serious conversations about conversion therapy and trying to become a state that makes this as unacceptable here as it would be around the country. And I know we'll talk about this at this summit. We have work groups that are working on establishing hate crime legislation. We are one of 5 states that has no hate crime laws, and we want to change that at the state and local levels. We have really important work to do, and we will do it better collectively than we would separately and in our own particular isolated areas. And so I look at this summit as being a great example. Brandi talked about the incredible hurtfulness that came out when the platform of the North Dakota GOP was exposed through the media, in which it was very clear that they had a very misinformed, hateful, misdirected platform directed at the LGBTQ plus community. What I really celebrate in responding to that platform when it was publicized, and I think most of us attributed it to the summit, is the fact that 15 organizations very quickly coalesced in developing a response to that platform, which went out to every major newspaper in North Dakota. I don't think 4 years ago this would have been possible. We didn't know who we were, we didn't know who everybody else was, and it would have been really hard to be able to respond really quickly. So if there's any question about is there value of coming together around organizing, about finding out who our friends and allies and supporters are, I would say that in itself was a really great example of ways that we are able to come together and speak in one voice and really make a lot of people in our state, even within the GOP, question about whether or not this is the kind of values and verbiage they want to represent themselves. And it's reverberating through the election cycle as we go forth into the elections this year. So I celebrate all of us joining together tonight. I celebrate who each of you are, the fact that you are committing your time this evening and this weekend to come together to talk to other people in exchanging ideas and committing to personal and collective change is something to really take a great deal of encouragement from. So thank you, Alex, for your leadership on this. Thank you for the committee members for putting work, and thank you all for joining this evening. Brandi, your words were beautiful and brilliant and speak to the future of where we need to go. And I want to again celebrate Carrie Evans from the city of Minot in the wonderful role that she played there. And as these voices come together and are exposed and lifted up, we have much to celebrate, even during this time of divisiveness and anxiety. So thank you for allowing me this moment to be able to reflect backwards and to hopefully look forward. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Barry. I don't know if you guys know this, but Barry's a true hero in North Dakota. Like he is everywhere, and working with every organization, always working to create change. If you guys don't know him, this is the man. He's the one that started the summit. So him and Aaron and the group, and it's really grown. And I do have to say thank you to the committee too. Everything everyone has done this year. We went from planning an in-person, and then in June, we decided that we're gonna have to switch this to virtual. And the work that has been done, Barry's been there too. So he can't say he hasn't been here this year because he's been a part of this every step of the way. And there's so much that has come out of the summit, and it's been from the GOP, how all these different organizations came together. So there's still activism work like going on, and there's still a lot of work between all the organizations that have come through the summit. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's nice to know that we're on a united front. And I don't know why you put me talking, because I'm the awkward one. But thank you, Barry, and thank you, Brandi. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this year's summit. This is going to be an amazing weekend. We have so much content. We have, like you said, we have conversion therapy. We have family law Q&A with Shannon Parvey and Ming Wong. We have deep canvassing with Vivian Topping, which is going to be an interesting one. All of the content is going to be great. And I just want to say that as we continue, you're all going to learn more about each other. You're going to get that connection and build off of it. And so I hope, with like the icebreaker that we're about to do, that you really take the chance to get to know one another, because that's going to leave you're here for the reason that you came, which doesn't make sense. Sorry. You came here and you're going to get what you came for the summit. I can't talk tonight. So we're going to go right to this icebreaker. If you want to join us, I'm going to put the link in the chat. So the Zoom meeting will be ending. We will be going to the icebreaker. It's on the link, and everyone will be paired randomly with another person, and you'll play for 4 minutes, get brought back to icebreaker. Then you'll be put in another game for 4 minutes with another person. And it's just getting to know random people. It's random questions. It's a really great way to get to know one another, because a lot of us, I see a lot of new faces, and I'm really excited to get to know all of you this weekend. So does anybody have any questions about the icebreaker tonight before we get into that? Okay, well, I'm going to put the link down then, and I will see you guys at the icebreaker.
And just look in the chat for the icebreaker link.
Yeah, sorry.
Alex, I'm a little unclear about the icebreaker. Do we just click on the link to go there?